Welcome to the Need to Know podcast from the Wilson Center, a podcast for policymakers available to everyone. Always informative, nonpartisan, and relevant, we go beyond the headlines to understand the trend lines in foreign policy. Welcome back to another episode of Need to Know. I'm your host, John Milewski. Need to Know is a podcast produced by the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. The center is congressionally chartered, scholarship-driven, and fiercely nonpartisan. Need to Know is all of the above, and it's a podcast for policymakers available to everyone. This past weekend, history was made in Mexico with the election of our southern neighbor's first female chief executive, Claudia Sheinbaum. Voters also elected all members of Mexico's Congress and governors in 8 states, as well as the head of Mexico City's government. Joining us to discuss this historic moment and more is Lila Abed. Lila is the acting director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. She joins us from Mexico City, where she has served as an international electoral observer. Lila, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
So much for having me.
So you had a ringside seat to history. Pretty exciting. Tell us about the vibe.
Yeah, so these were Mexico's most consequential elections. They were the largest in its history. And like you well mentioned, Mexico elected its first female president, current Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's protege and former mayor of Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum. And what we have revealed, or what pollsters have revealed in the past several weeks, came to reality this past Sunday in Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum won by a landslide, almost 30 points ahead of opposition candidate Xochitl Gálvez. But more than the presidency, the governing party's coalition won 7 of the 9 governorships. They attained a supermajority in Congress. They won the mayorship of Mexico City and the majority of the districts in the capital. And so this was an overwhelming victory for Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador and the party that he founded, Morena. The real question going forward is what kind of government Claudia Sheinbaum is going to implement, whether she's going to strictly continue on her predecessor's political platform, or will she make a mark of her own? Now, serving as an electoral international observer registered with the National Electoral Institute in Mexico provided myself and our team a firsthand opportunity to really see the sophistication of organizing such large elections in Mexico. The National Electoral Institute had to install 170,000 polling stations throughout the country, and seeing thousands, millions of Mexicans go to the ballot box to vote for their candidate was truly a unique experience, and it was also a testament to Mexico's democratic and thriving political system.
Many questions follow up, but before I get to those, I should note women in Mexico just got the right to vote in 1953. In the United States, it was 1920. So with a 30-year head start, the United States still hasn't elected a woman. Mexico just did it. Pretty remarkable.
It's remarkable and a moment to remember in Mexico's 200-year history. Mexicans elected the first female president, but it really builds on women's efforts in past decades to gain political representation in Mexico. In 1953, women, got the right to vote, like you mentioned, John. In the mid-1990s, there were legislative reforms that increased political representation for women in Congress. And in 2014, with the political reform that was approved, 50% of all candidates had to be women and are women. And so Mexico does have gender parity in Congress. And I will add that currently the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a woman. The president of the National Electoral Institute is led by a woman. And so it really is an important time for all women in Mexico. And now they have a female leader that hopefully will be able to address the most important issues on Mexicans' minds. But the reality is that she won with such an overwhelming percentage of the vote. She got more votes than Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador did in 2018 when he received 53% of the vote. Now Claudia reached almost 60% of the popular vote. And so it's really, yes, a testament to her long political career, but it was also a referendum of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's 6-year term.
Yeah, in a world that is divided in ways that are actually thin margins, this was an amazing mandate. You just don't see these kind of margins in elections anytime in recent memory. I want to ask you about the violence that marred the campaign season. The government says that 20 to 21 local candidates were killed. Some private surveys put that number higher at closer to 40, 37 by one count. And 18% of the polling places over the weekend couldn't open due to various threats. What does that tell us about the state of play and what President-elect Sheinbaum will have to deal with?
Well, I think ahead of the elections, the reality is that Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's failed security strategy of hugs, not bullets, was not able to resolve the deep insecurity issues that Mexico faces on a daily basis. I think that Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador's security strategy focused on more of the prevention side of security instead of combating transnational criminal organizations in Mexico that have become empowered and have taken over a large portion of Mexico's territory. And so ahead of this electoral cycle, which was historic and the largest in the country's history, there was not only 35 candidates or more that were killed, but if we look at the data and the results of AMLO's security strategy in the past 6 years, there's been more than 180,000 homicides, more than 37 journalists killed, environmental activists that were assassinated, 10 to 11 women die every single day because of their gender. And this is the deep insecurity problem that Mexico's next president, Claudia Sheinbaum, will have to address immediately. And we will be monitoring whether her security strategy will be a continuation of her predecessor's platform or if she will try and do a different strategy to really address these problems that are only getting worse with time.
And she said she's going to be the bravest president, but she hasn't gone into much detail about exactly what that's going to mean.
You know, if you look at her 100 government point plan, there are certain sectors that mark a stark difference from Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, including, for example, on the energy sector. She does want to invest more in renewable and cleaner energies. And that reflects sort of her scientific and environmental engineering background. But at the same time, her political platform has a lot of contradictions. So she wants to invest in renewables, but she also wants to strengthen the CFE, which is the Federal Electricity Commission in Mexico, and continue to have a large share of the market. She wants to strengthen Pemex, for example. On the security front, she does want to create a national intelligence agency to have better intelligence gathering and information to combat transnational criminal organizations. But at the same time, she wants to continue consolidating the National Guard that AMLO created and making it part of the Ministry of Defense, which in essence is a continuation of what many have called the militarization of previous civilian forces in Mexico. And so we see a lot of these contradictions, and I think it's very symbolic of sort of the balance that she's going to have to strike when in power on October 1st of how much does she continue with AMLO and how much can she actually differentiate herself from her predecessor. I will just say one last thing, and given the results, the overwhelming landslide majority and victory that the governing party's coalition received in this electoral cycle is sort of pushing or reversing Mexico back to a single party dominant rule, one that lasted for 71 years until the 2000 democratic transition. And given that the other traditional political parties are highly discredited in Mexico, one can only envision a change in regimen, really, ahead of these elections where Mexico comes back to a hegemonic party that has control over the presidency, over the legislative branch, potentially influencing the judicial branch. And so what this says about Mexico's future democratic system is something that remains to be seen.
I want to dig a little deeper on that one, Lila, if we can. AMLO has been pursuing policies that would change the balance of power, according to analysts, as far as the democratic control of the judiciary. Some have even gone as far as to throw around the autocrat word, certainly trying to build a stronger chief executive. What do we know about Sheinbaum's intentions in this area? Will she pursue those policies that AMLO has been pursuing? Will he have time with his remaining months in office to make some changes before he exits?
So he will, and the expectation is that he will try to pass the majority of the 20 constitutional and legal reforms that he's already presented to Congress. AMLO will have 1 month exactly to engage with the newly elected Congress starting on September 1st until October 1st when the new president takes office. And one expects that he will try and push several of the constitutional reforms while he's still president of Mexico. One of the most important reforms is the judicial reforms that hopes or seeks for judges and Supreme Court justices to be elected by popular vote. And this is incredibly alarming for Mexico's democratic system because the Supreme Court and the judicial branch has been the only true check and balance to the executive power these last 6 years. And so if Claudia got 60% of the popular vote, and if the judges and justices are elected by popular vote, the idea is that now the judicial branch and the Supreme Court will be filled by ideologically aligned judges and justices that will debilitate Mexico's checks and balances power. On the legislative branch, by having a 2/3 majority, not only in Congress, but now also with the governorships around the country, this isn't necessarily healthy for Mexico's democracy as it isn't for any thriving democracy. It's always important for a democratic system to have a healthy representation from the opposition, that there's consensus and negotiation. And so how Claudia Sheinbaum will take advantage of the situation, whether she will auto-regulate herself in terms of, refraining from completely taking over the political system is a big question lingering ahead of her administration. And I think a very true question for many Mexican citizens. The citizens did vote. They did vote overwhelmingly for the coalition party, but the country remains deeply polarized and divided. And so Claudia Sheinbaum will inherit a country not only, again, that's deeply polarized, but with real issues that she's going to have to address immediately, including the economy, including security, including the education system, public health, and access to social security. But in addition, how is she going to either change or continue the relationship with the United States of AMLO, or whether she will be open to strengthening cooperation with its northern partner? It's going to be incredibly important to see how the Claudia Sheinbaum, makes a mark of her own in terms of her relationship with the United States and with the U.S.'s next president, whoever wins on November 5th.
Yeah, as usual, you're a step ahead of me, Lila. I was going to, our primary audience for this program is policymakers. And so I know that our listeners on the Hill are very curious about what you just mentioned at the end of that answer. Any tea leaves that can be read, any insights into what we can expect as far as Sheinbaum's posture toward the United States?
Yeah, and in conversations, that I've had with members of Claudia Sheinbaum's team, as well as with U.S. officials, I think there's a real optimism going ahead that there will be stronger cooperation between both nations, especially true on security. I mean, it really, mutual trust and security cooperation has deteriorated under the AMLO administration. And so it can only go up from here. And I think there is a real intention from Mexico's government to cooperate more with the United States on the security front. I think in terms of migration, the United States, depending on who wins the White House, the tone, the policies, the narrative might be different, but migration will continue to be at the forefront of the bilateral agenda. Mexico is now currently not just a transit country for migrants, but it is now also a destination for large amount of migrants that can't reach the United States. And so cooperating with the United States on migration is also in the interest of Mexico's government. And so I think we will continue to see cooperation on this issue as well. And of course, on commercial ties, Mexico is the U.S.'s top trading partner. It positioned itself as so in 2023 with two-way trade totaling just shy of $800 billion above China, above Canada. And so integrating commercial ties, strengthening commercial ties is going to be vital for both of the economies, for the North American economy, and especially so ahead of the 2026 USMCA review, which will, put on the table really fundamental issues and some trade disputes that are going to be discussed in 2026. So there's a lot of moving pieces, fundamental issues to address, and hopefully both nations will reach a consensus and deepen cooperation in the next years.
There's always a lot of symbolism involved in a new president's first overseas or beyond the border trip. Do we have any expectation that we could see Claudia Sheinbaum in Washington, D.C. anytime soon after her swearing in?
I think, from what I've heard, John, is that she will refrain from visiting Washington until Inauguration Day in the United States, just because, the political scenario is also very heated. And during an electoral cycle, political issues tend to be, just more sensitive overall. And so it's expected that she will visit Washington perhaps early next year. And I think it will be very important for her to meet with the next U.S. president to really define sort of the main objectives on the bilateral agenda, so that Mexico can also add priorities to the bilateral agenda that, it deems completely necessary in terms of cooperating with the United States. And there has to be a mutual understanding, mutual cooperation, mutual trust, and utilizing the mechanisms that are already in place anywhere, from the high-level economic dialogue to the high-level security dialogue to the North American Leader Summit. These are real mechanisms that are in place that allow day-to-day communication between mid and high level public officials on both sides of the border that are truly the ones that carry out the way that, the issues on the bilateral agenda. So hopefully they will continue strengthening these mechanisms, and hopefully they will be able to discuss the future of what Mexico-U.S. relations will look like.
A final thought, Lila. The polls were accurate. Sheinbaum won, and if anything, she may have even won by a larger margin than anticipated. But were there any surprises? And the Moreno party did well, as also was anticipated, but any surprises in this election?
Well, the real surprise, I believe, for many Mexican citizens was this overwhelming landslide. I think there was a clear expectation that Claudia Sheinbaum was going to win the presidency, that she was going to become Mexico's first female president. But even though polls had, marked a 30-point lead ahead of Xochitl Gálvez, many believed that Claudia Sheinbaum would win by a more narrow margin, perhaps between 10 to 15, maximum 20 points. And so having won with 30 points ahead of Xochitl Gálvez, having the governing party win a 2/3 majority in Congress, 7 of the 9 governorships, mayor of Mexico City. I mean, the real surprise was just how much Mexican citizens want to see a continuation of AMLO's political platform. And the real challenge for Claudia Sheinbaum is what role, if any, AMLO is going to continue to have during her administration. Claudia Sheinbaum is a deeply independent woman. She has a long trajectory in public service. She has the experiencing of governing a huge city like Mexico City, which has over 25 million people. And so she knows how to lead a team. She is a scientist. She's an environmental engineer. She does have a PhD from UC Berkeley. She has the credentials to be the president. But again, she did win not only because AMLO handpicked her as his successor, but because she has promised to build what she calls the second level of AMLO's fourth transformation government that he implemented in Mexico. And so again, it's going to be really interesting to see how much she continues with AMLO's policies, where she will make a difference. I think there is a real optimism that in renewable energy, she'll be able to attract more investment, that on the security front, there will be more efforts to combat transnational criminal organizations. And I think on other fronts, right, she will make a difference. And so these are just speculations. It's just speculation. But, if one analyzes sort of her career, one can understand that she is poised and ready to become Mexico's first female president.
Will the protege step out of the shadow of the mentor? And, AMLO, for the record, has said he's going to step back, but the proof will be in the pudding. We'll all be watching. Thank you, Lila Abed. And as always, lots of insights, and we really appreciate your time. And safe travels back to D.C. We'll see you back here when you return. I also want to tell our listeners that Lila will also be appearing on one of our sister programs, Wilson Center Now, this week as well. And we'll have a little more time to go into some more depth on some of the topics we just discussed today. Thanks again, Lila. For those of you interested in learning more, you can visit, you're welcome. You can visit wilsoncenter.org and use the program tab at the top of the homepage. Visit the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. You'll find much valuable work from Lila and her team. We'll be back with another episode of Need to Know soon. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Milewski. Thanks for your time and interest.